So let's take a closer look at the celestial view. This approach to ethics holds that morality is grounded in and measured by standards beyond human nature, that morality is impartial and logically derivable. In the celestial view, we attempt to approach ethical questions from the view of the universe rather than from our personal view or even from a general human viewpoint. Some examples of this view are of this sort of universal view are Kant's universal law of reason, Mill's greatest happiness principle, and Plato's form of the good. And I include this only as a reference for you. We did not read Plato's Ethics in our class, but it can still be helpful to see how old this approach to ethics is. Plato was doing philosophy in the 300s BCE. For Kant, let's remember, morality is derived from pure reason, not human nature. So any being capable of reason must act according to the universal laws of conduct and ethics that Kant argues for. In Rini's words, for Kant, quote, morality is all about guiding rational agents who are capable of making mistaken choices. Kant, of course, wasn't thinking about intelligent robots 2 centuries ago, but it's not hard to imagine what he'd say now. If robots can think for themselves and make reasoned choices, then the rules apply equally to them and to us, end quote. So this notion of from the point of view of the universe, um, in Rini's words, can be understood as, quote, it counts as moral only if it can be justified from some impersonal perspective divorced from the concerns of any particular individuals. So this is a utilitarian conceptualization of the ultimate perspective that matters in ethics. The greatest happiness principle, right, maximizing the benefit and minimizing the harm to all, is the guiding principle for behaving morally good from the point of view of the universe. So that was the celestial view of ethics. Why is this a good approach to programming ethics into artificial intelligence? Well, simply put, where humans fail, AI can succeed. Humans are imperfect, and the reason Rini gives in the text sort of blames evolution. She calls it our accidental biological history. Here, accidental can be meant in two senses, and both are relevant. The first is the place of accidents in our evolutionary history, right? The random mutations or developments that prove out to be better at promoting our survival. Caring more for our offspring than others is an example of this, according to the celestial view. These mutations are accidents in that they are random, not causally determined by the choices we make. We didn't choose them, these evolutionary mutations. They just happen to us and then happen to go well, and so they stick around. Also, accidental can refer to a lack of logical connection to the view of the universe. Our human biology is accidental or incidental to the view from the universe, not central to it. It doesn't factor in as a primary feature of concern. Rini later even calls our preferences logically arbitrary. In other words, my preferences are logically arbitrary in that my personal investment in a situation does not factor into my moral reasoning more than anyone else's, or at least it is not supposed to in the celestial view. So the fact that we care more about our own children than those of others is not a relevant fact to impartial and universal moral evaluations. In the example Rini provides, a version of the trolley problem, the self-driving AI cars are, in fact, better at applying the universally objective moral principles within a situation. In this case, the utilitarian principle of the greatest happiness principle. The case being within Rini's example of the self-driving car. Robots get a fresh start, as Rini says. They can do the math, the utilitarian calculus. She says, quote, to avoid killing the 3 kids on the street is to swerve into a flooded ditch where your 2 children will almost certainly drown. What she means by this is that so because of our human accidental biological feature of having strong preferences for taking care of our own offspring over others, humans are unreliable at being able to apply something like the greatest happiness principle in a truly disinterested or objective way. Self-driving cars programmed to use the utilitarian calculus will be reliable because they won't have the same difficulty with being impartial. Many modern philosophers and many in the tech industries do think about AI this way, meaning in a very utilitarian way. I suspect it is because computer programming is itself very mathematical, so the utilitarian framework is just easier to program. Coding for laws is easier than coding for adaptive behavior. But as Rini points out a little later in the article, artificial intelligence is moving towards this adaptive thinking, or what we can call a kind of synthetic learning. And with that, these programs can write their own new lines of codes. Computers programming themselves might very well look different than humans programming computers. As Rini says, quote, AlphaGo shows that AI can play complex games better than we can teach it, end quote. So maybe we would say, great, artificial intelligence can work out complex moral problems that we can't. What's the problem? But Rainey identifies another, more hidden problem. And it's hidden because the celestial view relies on moral principles being logically sound, but reasoned out according to human reason. And so we often can't or forget to imagine how AI will be a different kind of reasoning. There are two epistemic problems. One, moral dilemmas and contexts are not like games, not like games like Go. And so this is a problem for how to program them, how to program the ethics if it isn't actually like a game, meaning we don't know all the rules. And two, we won't know if they win. By that we mean their decisions likely won't make sense to us. Um, and so this will be a problem for how to evaluate AI in its process of executing its moral evaluations. So now I'll read these problems in Rini's own words, and I think that will give us some clarity here. She says the first is, how does a machine learn morality? Morality is not the same as Go. A game is defined by a limited set of rules so that there are clear criteria for what counts as a win. This isn't necessarily true of morality. Of course, according to the celestial view, there is some set of objectively correct rules for action, and a machine that learns these would thereby win. But the point is that we don't know what these rules are, because we are morally flawed. If we knew, then we wouldn't need super intelligent machines to figure it all out. End quote. She then goes on to say, quote, but this leads us into the second problem. How are we going to respond once the developing AI starts to deviate from what seems morally right to us? Eventually it must, or else there's no point in expecting it to escape from the orbit of our limited human morality. The problem is that advanced robots' moral choices will not make sense to us. End quote. So, in other words, while in many closed systems like games, there are settled, agreed upon standards for what it means to win. So, even if I can't understand the strategy or the decision making involved, I can tell the move was good if it was a move that leads to winning. But morality doesn't work like that. So this is an excuse me, so this is an epistemological puzzle on two levels, meaning a puzzle about how we know or understand what the AI is doing. On one level, we might not have a way to know, as Rini puts it, quote, how would we know whether an AI's seemingly nonsensical moral choices are winning? How could we tell if it had how could we tell if it hadn't gone terribly off the moral rails, end quote. But also, maybe the AI would be able to get the right moral rules and programming based on this impartial view from nowhere. But as Regina Rini says, quote, that that they won't be able to explain it to our limited brains. And maybe from the point of view of the universe, it really is morally important to protect both babies and sofas, end quote. So those are the epistemic problems or the epistemic puzzles with using a celestial view to teach robots ethics. But there is also a practical problem. We will and already have interfered in AI's self-developing moral rules and behavior. So even if we can accept that the AlphaGo model in principle, in practice, we won't allow machines to do what we find morally unacceptable. Or in Rini's words, quote, here's why the celestial view will not help us with robot morality. If there is some objective moral perspective out there beyond human comprehension, we won't willingly allow our machines to arrive at it. The farther they stray from recognizable human norms, the harder it will be for us to know that they are doing the right thing, and the more incomprehensible it will seem. We won't permit them to become too much better than us because we won't permit them to become too different from us. End quote. Basically, we will almost certainly not tolerate AI developing too far past our understanding of morality, even though we know we are morally imperfect.